Recording? Yes, recording. Can I stream as well? Yes, I am streaming and recording. Awesome stuff. Hi everyone, welcome to my first session this week. It is Sunday, 7:30 p.m. in Australia. I need to mute that one. So if you're joining from India, it should be 8 a.m. there. If you're joining from the United States of America, my bad, I'm going to backtrack on that. 7:30 p.m. here in Australia, in the land down under. If you're in India, it's 2 p.m. If you are from the UK, it's 8:30 a.m. And if you're in other parts of Europe, maybe 9:30, 10:30 a.m. Anyway, welcome. This is my first week officially kicking off this channel, and I'm really excited to have you on board. I'm going to explore today. We're going to explore an open source project. I'm getting ideas for this exploratory testing by searching top 10 open source projects. I had this list come up. I've done some brief exploratory of Visual Studio Code, but because it's a developer IDE and I don't practice being a developer all day every day, I didn't feel like re-going over that one. So the second one in the list today is Facebook's React Native. React Native is a JavaScript library that you can use to build mobile apps. It's generally what Facebook is built on. It allows you to write Android and iOS apps with somewhat more native elements than other all-purpose language tools out there. Because it is JavaScript, it does come with some of its own quirks. JavaScript can have a little bit of a learning curve if you're not really used to it. I'm not going to explore the code repository in depth. I'm just going to go over how I would use exploratory testing when I'm checking out a code repository. And this was the next one on my list that I wanted to go through. I've got a little bit of Git cheat sheet. I might do a little bit of Git. Might check out some code, might try and run some code. Not too sure if I'll get that far just yet. And we're going to have a look through the repository here. I might post that one as a link in the chat room. React Native is what we are exploring. There we go. So I've got just some paint up, so I might take some notes on that. I got my GitHub window, or actually technically Git bash, which gives me more Linux-like commands because I don't like using, or Windows terminal is just not what I'm used to. Oh, slashes are in the wrong direction too, so there's that. But I like using more Linux-based commands. I should actually stream this from my Ubuntu machine, but I'm doing it from Windows because it's, I guess, more used in the gaming platforms. I think the software for live streaming tends to integrate better on Windows, maybe because more video gamers use Windows-based machines, but anyway, so I'm trying to stream from Windows. Maybe I should stream from Ubuntu one day. If you'd like me to try to stream from Ubuntu one day, just let me know, and I will oblige. I will fulfill that request. Anyway, so if you're looking at a GitHub repository, if it's the first time you've seen GitHub, there's a couple of different areas. You can watch the repository. I think that sends you a notification, or if there's a new release, you get a notification. I'm not watching this project at the moment. I'm not going to test that feature either because that feature is widely used across multiple repositories. You can star and you can fork. Fork puts a local copy in your own account, and then you can tweak it from there. So then you can go commit and make changes to your own local fork of that code branch. This is a very active repository. As you can see, there were quite a few commits. The most recent commit was 13 hours ago. If we go into that commit details, so the fix typo in comments. Okay, so because this is fixing a typo in the comments, you kind of expect all the tests to pass and nothing major to really happen. So it was for iOS. Let's have a read through. What are they doing? They're removing this line to image memory bytes. It has the default calculation of a single image of a GIF. If you have custom calculation of image decodes bytes, you can assign it using your value. So they've removed that line and changed it to memory bytes of the image with the default calculation of static image or GIF. Custom calculations of decoded bytes can be assigned manually. And what is it? It's for React keyframe animation. Considering it's just a comment, actually it's in this. If we access the, oh no, that just takes us, here, if we go view file, this will help give us a bit more context as to what that change involves. Just a quick browse through, you can see that there are lots of comments in this source file. And let's see, so RCT image loader, probably something to do with loading images if this is named fine. Provides an interface for providing an image caching strategy. So caching is where you basically your static files that might be on your website, you serve them up so that you're not having to reload the same resource every time someone comes to your web page. If you have no caching on your website, your performance can be quite slow because each time someone visits your website, they have to re-download all of the images, all of the HTML, any videos and whatnot. So generally, if you've got a website and it doesn't change much, you might put a cache in front of it that stores a lot of that stuff more in memory, so that when someone else comes to your website, instead of having to re-download them, it's, I think, a bit fresher. If my explanation is incorrect, please get back to me with a better explanation for that. It's generally a good thing to have caching because it generally improves performance. Once you start getting into building caching for apps and websites, you do get into some more really technical networking and cloud abilities, and I think it's a bit of a rabbit hole you can go down a lot. Okay, so it's an interface for image caching. So if available, the protocol is invoked before loading an asset. Implementation should return either a new URL or nil when redirecting is not needed. So if you don't need to redirect, new URL. Okay, yeah, so there we go. So this was the line that was changed, and the it is related to this property, and if we just do a search for that property, we should be able to get okay, it really is just a property. I might have to find something further down. How do properties work in what language are we? What language? So this is Objective-C. So it's just got annotation at property. I'm not too sure, but yeah. The change itself is only a comment. Seems pretty benign. And did that did that kick off a build? Doesn't look like it kicked off a build. And it was committed. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, you can browse through the commits. I think there's when commits go in, there does look like there's some sort of continuous integration or build. So for example, this typo actually failed, even though it only accesses, it was only changing a comment. So this is actually a really weird response. I wouldn't expect this type of change to break a build. So if we click on that, some checks were not successful. 1 failing, 9 successes. So we had our CI, Circle CI, detox end-to-end, test failed. But everything else, analyze, check out, JS coverage, test Android, test iOS, test JavaScript, test Node, and test coverage by the looks of that. But if we go into the details for this one, I'll close this one down. We might be able to investigate why it failed, because it really shouldn't have failed. It was it was a comment change. Yeah, I mean, like, your builds shouldn't fail when you change your comment. So something happened. So our build for our iOS simulator, so we went through environment, config, we installed Node, we did a run, sweet. Output is too large. Okay, sure. Done a build, 1 warning generated, a lot of that doesn't really. So what have we got there? We have cast expression to void to silence warning. Is that a compile issue? No? What? Misuse of, it's just a warning. Sorry, not an error, it's a warning. I'm getting too caught up on details. Error. Oh no, that's just a that doesn't look like it's an issue. If we go right down to the bottom, what was the last thing? Output is too large. So there was 5 warnings. Can I just access that? Download full file output as a file. So if I open that up, that is a lot of text. It is so much output. Okay, command fail. So the Xcode build just looked like it failed. Potentially rerunning this part of the CI might produce a different result. Maybe there's an issue on the build server where Xcode is not working. That could warrant further investigation. If we read a bit further, what are we doing? So project, Iron Tester, Xcode proj, we got a scheme, we got a config, it's a release config, using an iPhone simulator, derived data. There could be, I know with Xcode, it can get flaky. I think that's the best word with derived data. Sometimes removing the derived data file from an Xcode project and then re-kicking off your build might work as well. That could be one way to troubleshoot this problem. But because I don't have access, or actually technically, because this is an open source project, I guess anyone can rerun. I need write permissions to trigger the build. Okay, so I actually can't. I could potentially try and rerun job with SSH, but anyway, this is not a pipeline that is my area of expertise. I just wanted to show you how you can debug a situation, and using a bit of investigation, how you might try to fix something like this on a fairly trivial change. If your build started failing because you changed a comment, it's probably not the code you submitted. It's probably something up with the build pipeline, or maybe it was a bit of code that someone committed just before you did, and they didn't do all of their testing, and so there was something broken with theirs, but it only came out in your commit or build. Maybe, who knows? Who knows what's going on? But that's how you can investigate commits on a GitHub repository that is set up with Circle CI. I mean, like, it'd kind of be cool to be able to click this rerun one and see if it just, because we had a 6-stage process, and all of this is perfectly fine. If we reran this, would it just restart from here, or would it do everything from the start? Because that's a lot of extra waste of time. That's at least an extra 5-6-ish minutes just waiting for it to kick off again. And this commit also had a whole bunch of other build testing against it. If we reran that build, would it actually kick off all of these other testing, which would be a huge waste of resources? There is no point in rerunning these scenarios. That could be one way you could optimize your continuous integration tactics. If you've already done a particular amount of testing and you have a test that failed towards the end, or maybe one of the last suites of tests you want to run, as long as the tests that are in this framework are generally independent of all the tests in the other one, and you can just restart this one and run it from the beginning, that should save a lot of extra time, because clicking run when you're doing builds and then watching stuff happen, it takes forever, so you're likely to get distracted. And then by the time if it fails again for some weird reason, by the time you realize it fails again, you've already moved on to some other work and you have to context switch again. So the whole point of testing should be to facilitate fast feedback. And if you have to wait 3 or 4 hours for a build to rerun when it was at the end of the process, then that feedback loop is too big. I think focusing on that's a tactic you can use if you're trying to improve your continuous integration pipelines. If you focus on improving the feedback cycle of when error messages occur, or when issues occur, or how quickly someone can debug a particular situation, that would be adding a bit of value. Now, it can be a bit daunting to investigate this stuff if you come from a non-technical background. But really, all we did was click around on a couple of links. We downloaded a text file, and generally with error messages, the most important stuff is right at the bottom, because everything else is just what it logged before it got to there. See, this here is also a stack trace because of the indentation. It's got an @ and it also gives you the name of the project, or the file that was being run, the line, and some other messages. So the way to read a good stack trace, there's different ways depending on what framework or languages you're using, but usually stack trace, the most important stuff is either at the top or at the bottom. The fact that this says at startup, that's not really useful, and this is the main. So the most useful stuff is usually up at the top, This was the last process to fail before it populated the error message all the way up. So technically it did fail here, but it failed because on that line this function was called, and then on this line this function was called, or something along those lines. So it tends to, a stack trace is like a stack. It is a stack. That's why it's called a stack trace. Anyway, so there was some sort of syncing error. I actually think kicking off this build again and seeing what would happen would be a way to potentially see if this is still an issue. I know that's not really the best thing to do. You should understand why it really happened. But sometimes software is just a little bit like that. You just press the rerun button and hope for the best, and sometimes situations change. And sometimes we don't have the luxury of time to investigate all these issues in depth either. So, that was a bit of a segue on build status for a GitHub repository. I wonder if we can find a successful push. Maybe it just shows, looks like it just shows an X on the failed ones. So this one failed a little bit earlier. Cool. This one failed even earlier. This one failed on the iOS. Okay, so ones without X's probably passed. So this one looks like it passed. Browse the repository at this point in history. That is my commit number. And I've got no idea. What does that button do? I guess copy to clipboard? Text transform breaks other styles when applied to text. It seems related to the usage of replace span, which allows drawing text manually but seems to throw away some changes made by other span applied to the text. To fix it, I remove the usage of replacement span and simply transform the text before appending it to that spannable string. To make sure text transform is inherited correctly, I added it to text attributes, which handles this. So based on the summary of the commit, it's on Android and it's related to text styles. So if we had a string on a screen, how I might go about testing this, just from reading the comment, is I'd probably do just a testing screen. I might put a string on that screen, and I might make sure it inherits from text transform. I might try and transform that string using whatever transformation methods are in that. And maybe before the code commit, check that it's still broken. Maybe have strings that span the whole screen, or do something around replacement spanning. So that apparently allows the text to be drawn manually. Okay, so when it changes, it doesn't persist the transformation. So it probably, before this was fixed, probably caused maybe a string to render incorrectly on the screen. Maybe the screen, the text on the screen went over the screen size, maybe. So it's just applying a transformation to the text before making it spannable. Okay, so yeah, checking before and after with a couple of test strings and seeing if it renders correctly could be a way to test that one. Pull request was that one. Does that take me to CI? Oh, cool. They include screenshots of before the test and after the test, and they actually used a test string with something and stuff after. Okay. And they added an extra test case. So as a tester, we could also review to see if that extra test had adequate coverage. But yeah, it looks like it was approved by a couple of people. It's been merged in. It's there was a PR to add test cases. PR stands for pull request, and it's just a pretty straightforward bug fix, I guess, by the whatnot. And so there's a static code analysis bot that seems to leave comments if it finds issues. So this change probably didn't agree with the lint standards, which just codified rules of practice when you're writing code. So for example, some people might put tabs as their white space, some people might put spaces. Putting rules in your lint just ensures a bit of consistency across the project. So what's important for your project, you codify. Maybe you put your curly brackets in a particular way. Maybe you feel like your buttons should have a certain standard when you're naming them. They shouldn't be named just button. You can codify a lot of code analysis tools in your projects to help you get some of those issues, but it has to be important to the team. If no one actually listens to or actions these, then why do you have it there in the first place? So that is meant to fix a bug. If we click on that bug, where does that take us? Okay. This actually seems like a pretty useful bug description. It says using method, the text disappears on Android, and that works on iOS. Yep, cool. We know it's an Android problem just from reading that. That if you can write bug reports that are like that, you're gonna get on pretty well with your developer friends that you're working with. So yeah. They've included some extra information, I think build details maybe, or branches. I'm not too sure if that's useful to put in the title, but I don't know enough context of this project to know if that information is useful or not. Maybe it's just auto-collected and it's just appended to any bug that's been raised. There's apparently references to documentation. So this meta information, I guess, is just environment details. That information is more useful for a developer, but if a manager on a project was looking at this bug, they probably wouldn't care so much about this information. So there was a support in a React Native upgrade. Okay, so when doing transformations like uppercase, lowercase, or capitalization, it just makes the string disappear. Cool. Steps to reproduce, create an empty React Native project, and setting text transform property. So, for example, sample iPhone app. Cool. An Android emulator. Yep. Oh, and they've even got a demo. What happens? Oh, they even put together a demo project for debugging the situation. That is so cool. Like, imagine being able to isolate the project so succinctly that you can give someone sample code that they can build and run, and demo it fine. Oh, so it's welcome to the React Native. They're doing some stuff. The welcome to React Native is missing on this screen and missing on this screen. Okay, cool. Well, that's how you can investigate a written bug report. Maybe that gives you some pointers in how to write good bug reports too. And being able to go through the history of a bug. Yeah, so if you want more context around this bug, there's lots of conversation that you can continue reading. So that was the last successful build, I guess, for the React Native project. The thing is, sometimes this might sound like a fairly straightforward bug, but this was opened on the 27th of October and it has 20 comments, nearly 20, sorry, 19, my bad. And it was fixed 2 days ago. So sometimes bugs are a bit like that. Sometimes they just persist for a bit longer than you expect them to. I felt like I haven't done a huge amount of exploratory testing with this GitHub repository because I've just been following a path that led down a rabbit hole, and I've used some things to talk about how to analyze logs and how to track up on bugs. And this was just looking at recent code commits. So yeah, we've spent like half an hour just looking at the last couple of code commits, seeing why the last one failed and what caused the last one to succeed and how come that was a bug that needed to be fixing. So it's really fascinating stuff. So there's a bunch of other things you can click on from a GitHub repository. If you ever want to make a start on maybe contributing to an open source project, people recommend starting with documentation, but I'm not going to put forward that suggestion either, because I think to write good documentation, you have to have a good fundamental understanding of the project you are writing about. There might be some things in the documentation that you can tweak. So for example, by going to the React Native website, if they reference 2018 at the bottom of all their pages, you can put together a pretty simple pull request to update that to 2019. But Facebook are already pretty much on top of that, so you don't have to do like simple code commits there. Yeah, I think writing technical documentation is not a great recommendation for starting out on open source projects, but it is often the advice that people do give. I think people also suggest answering some of the questions on either forums or fags, but again, you need to have an in-depth knowledge to be able to contribute effectively. My suggestion for getting started with an open source project is to actually clone it, have a play around, see if you can get a build to work, see if you can follow the getting started, actually use it in an app or some demo, and that way you start building up the mental model of how this source code works. And once you expand your mental model, then you can potentially either ask some questions on the forums on how to do some things, or you might be able to start contributing to the community somehow. So we'll go through that approach right now. So we want to clone this repository. If we go back to code, we can get this git clone link. I'm just going to copy that. I have a code file in a folder called code. It is on my user profile /code. I've just got a file there. I've checked out Visual Studio Code before because I wanted to see how it goes, but I didn't even try building it. I think if I go get clone and then paste the link, that should work. So cloning, that's how you get an open source project on your local machine. This might take a while because React Native is a pretty big project. Yeah, that's gonna take a while. I might just leave that running. This is one of the reasons why sometimes dev work can take, so it feels like progress can be really slow. Sometimes you are just waiting for software to do something. I mean, like, in the meantime, I could switch over and do some more reading, but eventually I have to context switch to come back to this task I'm doing. And then by the time I come back, I might forget what I was doing. But checking out the bug repository for an open source project can also help you get up to speed. I don't really recommend trying to fix bugs if you're just trying to get started. There might be some easy bugs. Actually, I take that back. There is a recommendation. There is sometimes the developers or the community supporting these projects don't always have the time and capacity to fix all of these minor bugs that might come up in a project. So they might label some of the bugs as this is a easy starter. If you want to look to get involved, maybe have a look at some of these bugs. So we'll see if they've got any of these labels. We've got accessibility. We've got a whole bunch of API stuff. Component. They've got some docs for discussion. Oh, good first issue. Good first issue is something you might want to look for on GitHub projects. If you want to get started with maybe an easy to fix bug that no one has actually put aside the time to do just yet. You usually see a pretty good investigation of what's happening. So there's 16 open issues that people have tagged as potentially good for starting issue. Right to left bug with text component. Right to left rendering is usually something that happens in Arabic speaking countries, Hebrew, Arabic, and there's another language I think that renders right to left. Technically Japanese is, well, traditional Japanese is top to bottom, right to left, which can screw your head in a little bit, but they also do the left to right, writing, and top to bottom approach too. Okay, so yeah, they've got a right to left example. I'm really glad people are raising bugs on right to left. We work in a global market these days. You shouldn't ignore a particular demographic of the world just because you don't live in that space. I feel like it's important to provide a good user experience to all of your customers, no matter whatever config they like to run on. So, someone's testing a right to left app. The right as well. So, however, this is obviously left to right. Well, actually, technically the top row is right to left because it matches the top row up here, and they would expect the second row to also be right to left. Whereas what's happening is they've got right to left here and then left to right here. And they've tried a couple of things. So what are some of the comments? Oh, this was raised in 2016. This is a long-lived bug. This is an old bug. Holy cow. This is an old bug. I wonder why someone thought it was a good first issue. If it's been open for 2 years and 2 months. It looks like someone has got a potential workaround. Oh, Android works fine, iOS doesn't. Okay, so yeah, this is a pretty long conversation to follow just for what seems to be, you know, like a straightforward right to left bug, but obviously not. App is in English, but on Hebrew, right to left instead of regardless of the. Okay. Still facing the same issue. Okay. Yeah. If you want a heuristic for easily finding bugs, switch your phone into right to left, or switch on a Arabic language or Hebrew, and watch how it breaks your UI. It's usually pretty easy to find right to left bugs. Some apps don't even bother translating their strings, so it's just all in English, which is, I guess, a double fail. But at least it's not rendering incorrectly. But it doesn't provide that good user experience. So yeah, I would say right to left is one of my heuristics for mobile app testing that is usually pretty easy to find bugs. But it can be hard to convince teams they need to put in the effort to fix them. It can be hard to convince a product manager that this type of bug is important to fix. They might go and say, well, thanks for raising that. We know we have issues in right to left. We're not looking to launch our app in those parts of the world just yet. And also from looking at our current user base, less than 1% of our users use these languages. So we're not going to support that just yet. And it's perfectly fine for a product manager to turn around and say those things. It's just, if you want my tips in finding easy to find bugs on mobile apps, right to left is one of them. Another one is accessibility. Just use an app using VoiceOver or TalkBack on iOS or Android respectively, and it would be pretty easy to find bugs. I think that's one of the reasons why I don't really like React Native. I think for React Native, for mobile apps, I prefer to build native. I think the native environments tend to have more support for UI testing, accessibility, all these other parts of quality that are often overlooked. So yeah, that is my really brief introduction to if you wanted to get on board with some open source projects. I've gone over some testing heuristics of how to find low-hanging, easy to find bugs on mobile apps as well. We did actually check out the repository, though I think to get started I'd have to build a sample app, and I don't have my Windows environment set up to do Android development. I really should get my Mac fixed so I can do iOS development too. I should actually be doing this stuff from a Mac. I just don't have a working Mac at the moment, so I'm on Windows. Yeah, for mobile app development, I think Mac is more recommended than Windows, simply because if you're a mobile developer and you have to check out both Android and iOS apps, you have to use Xcode's IDE on Apple generally to check out your iOS projects. You can build a Hackintosh, you can get around it, but that's not recommended. And if you're checking out Android code, you can do it on any platform. You can do it on Windows, Ubuntu, Mac, or whatever. So because of the Apple dev restrictions, you see mobile developers will tend to work from a Mac, simply because of iOS being Apple. It's kind of annoying, but that's how it operates these days. That's how it goes. If you've enjoyed this, reach out, ask questions. I'll see if I haven't had anyone asking me any questions online so far. I might pop this up on YouTube and see if there's any feedback there. So we've just done a brief exploratory testing on how to get started with a open source project on GitHub. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back on tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Australian time, which is, if you're in the UK, that's 8 p.m. Sunday. It's 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is Los Angeles, California, so back in the USA, and it's 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so more of the, if you're from New York, you can join me at 12 p.m. tomorrow. It'll probably be today for you, but it'll be tomorrow for me. Time zones are tricky. Anyway, I'm going to be back on tomorrow, and if you've got questions or whatnot, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. In the meantime, have a good day, evening, or salutations, or wherever you are.